Olmsted ran the EPA's air division under President George W. Bush and is now a lobbyist for a number of power companies. He says parts of the Clean Air Act have worked, but it often smothers businesses with red tape.
There is no doubt that the permitting hurdles that you have to go through to build a big industrial plant are much more difficult to overcome in this country than in other countries. And as a result, you do see much more heavy manufacturing moving to other countries. And I don't think that's been a good thing for this country.
The environmental laws have not been a threat to our economic development. They've shown that it's not a choice between economic growth and environmental protection. The two go hand in hand.
California Congressman Henry Waxman wrote the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, clamping down on pollutants that caused acid rain and ozone depletion.
We've cut air pollution by 60% at a time when our economy was growing 200%. So it certainly didn't impede the growth of the economy.
Now the challenge of balancing environmental protection and economic growth is entering a new frontier. EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson wants to use the Clean Air Act to regulate carbon emissions.
Not only is she going to, she has to. The Supreme Court has held that carbon dioxide is a pollutant within the context of the Clean Air Act. So she has to look at what tools there are in the Clean Air Act which will allow her to regulate carbon.
CO2 is just completely different, and so if we were to reduce our CO2 emissions by 20%, that doesn't really make a difference in terms of the overall global problem, because a ton of CO2 that's emitted in New York has exactly the same effect in New York as a ton of CO2 emitted in Shanghai or Bangkok, and so it's just a very different type of problem, and it's the type of problem that the Clean Air Act just was not designed to deal with.
So at age 40, the Clean Air Act faces a midlife crisis. Can it confront environmental problems unheard of at its birth?
There is no doubt that the Clean Air Act has been one of the signal achievements of U.S. environmental policy, probably the most important achievement of U.S. environmental policy. I think the question now is, as we're nearing the 40th anniversary, whether people will essentially destroy the Clean Air Act by trying to use it for things it was never meant to do.
40 years after those protests, what role the Clean Air Act will play in the future remains a question. But the Act supporters say its impact is absolutely clear.
Probably breathing a lot cleaner air, which means that if you're not smoking, you're going to probably live a lot longer. And that's something. Not too many laws can say that.
In Washington, Dan Goldstein, Energy Now.